Delighted to say joining us here at GPFans, Blake Hinsey, former F1 technical engineer, now a Formula One content creator as well, which we will come on to a little later on. But Blake, thanks for joining us here at the Brewhouse and Kitchen in Milton Keynes, the perfect place to have a beverage before heading off to Silverstone for the Grand Prix weekend. Got a bit of time before we get into the British Grand Prix weekend, of course, here in January, but let's talk about your time in Formula One. Firstly, how on earth do you get into Formula One? How did you get into it?
It's a really short story, long story, and it's almost like it was an accident. So if we rewind back, I was probably 18 or 19. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And a lot of people going to university spend a lot of time thinking like, well, what do I want to do? And there's all these rules if you want to do this. No, throw that out the window. So my dad's friend had a race car. It was a hairdresser's car. It was a Miata Spec MX-5. And it was a race car. So he was like, do you guys, you and your dad, want to do some track days and check this thing out? I was like, sure. And that basically snowballed into this thing where it was like, okay, we got another car. We were doing, club racing on the weekends, and I wanted to learn how to make those cars go faster. So fast forward, I was like, right, I'll be a mechanical engineer because those are the people that figure that stuff out. I started getting involved with the Formula Student Program, or Formula SAE in the States. It's a design, build, race, collegiate competition, and that was like, right, that lit the fire under my ass, and I was like, I want to be involved in this, and then at that point, and I was quite old, I was like 20-something, early 20s, before Formula One really came on my radar. There was a lot of people in the UK. You grow up as a kid watching this stuff with your parents or your grandparents or whatever on the television. This was new for me, so that was really what got me started and interested in wanting to be a Formula One engineer.
Obviously, America, you think motor racing, particularly before the last few years, IndyCar, NASCAR. So how does Formula One get on your radar as an American at that point as a youngster?
I think it was the fact that the engineering enthusiasts were all looking at Formula One as like the technical expert, the technical pinnacle, the best part of the technical stuff. So that was like, right, well, that's the goal. And the cars that we were making looked very similar to the Formula One car. So I was like, okay, that's it. So I became very interested in that, started watching it, watch parties with a bunch of guys. And a lot of the races, if you're in America, are not at particularly accessible times. It's like, like having a couple beers and it's, 1 o'clock at night and the race is coming on and you're watching that. So that was really kind of, you see this stuff, you see, everybody gets that. They want to be on the pit wall. They see the race engineers, the strategists or whatever on the pit wall calling the shots. And the spectacle was so impressive, and it was like, right, that's what I want to do. But it was one of the things, it's like, well, how do I get there? And that leads into moving to the UK to get a master's degree in motorsport engineering at Oxford Brookes, because I met a lot of people from the US that were going there, then getting jobs in the UK working in Formula One. I was like, okay, that's got to be it then.
It's interesting that a lot of people would watch Formula One and go, ooh, the drivers. I want to be the driver. I want to be the guy behind the wheel, or maybe a Toto Wolff or someone like that, the big dog on the pit wall. You're watching it and going, ooh, I want to be the guy that's the mechanical, technical guy, the other guy on the pit wall, or the guy in the back of the garage.
Or the guy that you never even see, the person designing the stuff in the race cars. And that was really like a lot of people go into that and they see that and they start with this idea, but I wanted to be, I was really interested in technical stuff. I was really interested in making cars go faster. I'd had a bit of experience club racing. I wasn't particularly good, but it's like those topics interested me. So it's like vehicle dynamics was my target. I want to be a vehicle dynamics engineer. At that time, I would have taken any job, just to get my foot in the door. But I did, after my master's degree, land a job as a vehicle dynamics engineer at Force India. And so that was my step into Formula One, from, leaving the US at 25 to move to a different country, having never been out of the US, to a year later landing a job. It was like, oh crap. A lot of people are like, don't do that, it's crazy. It's like, it's not a good investment. It's a huge financial risk to do that. And I was like, okay, well, what else am I gonna do? I've applied to all the IndyCar and NASCAR teams and they've all said, well, you need experience. It's like, okay, but like, I don't have any yet. How do I get some? So I think the Formula One at the time was also leaning a lot more towards getting academic people in and then, bringing them up. Whereas a lot of this other stuff, people would start at the grassroots level and gain experience, you know, volunteering at a shop, sweeping the floors. Then you might go to a couple of races. You might be an apprentice mechanic or something like that. And then slowly work your way up to being a race engineer or strategist or something else. But Formula One, the teams are getting huge now. Hundreds and hundreds of people, and there's not that many people at that level. So they've got established systems, so now they need to start bringing in, you know, the future young people, the academics, and then giving them the context and framework to help them become the engineers they need them to be.
Now you touched on, you know, you've done some driving at that club level in America. And obviously you've had a successful career going into Formula One and the engineering side and have worked around the sport, which for a lot of people is a dream. Yeah. But was there ever that point that you thought, well, I could do the driving bit as well because you had that experience, or was there ever a reason why you decided not to go down the driver path, if you will?
I think probably because I wasn't that interested in it, which is weird because a lot of people are like, I want to be the driver. It's like I knew where the level was at, and like these people that they've been karting since they were kids, you know. And this is something I enjoyed doing, but like the thing that got me really excited was writing MATLAB code or doing analysis or understanding stuff, and it's a little bit different, but it was what got me excited. Like I really enjoyed club racing, but at the end of the day, didn't really have the cash to do it either. Racing at any level is insanely expensive, whether it's, you know, karting spec MX-5, that's a lot of money, and then having a garage and everything to work on the car. I was like, right, I'm gonna focus on being an engineer because I've got a much better chance of doing okay at this than being a crap driver.
Okay. Yeah, it's. I think that will be baffling to a lot of people to hear. Kind of, it's. I guess put it in context of like European soccer. Yeah, you're the equivalent of the kid that grows up to want to be the goalkeeper, right? There's something a little bit different about you to want to go down that route rather than the flashy attention route of the driver.
Yeah, exactly.
So you worked in Formula One. Which teams did you end up working for in your career?
So I worked for Force India from end of 2011 through 2014. So after working in vehicle dynamics for a bit, then I went trackside as performance engineer at the racetrack. So I did a year or 8 months as vehicle dynamics, and then they needed a performance engineer like pronto. So I was thrown into the deep end, sink or swim. And then Force India was a great team. And there was a lot of things that I loved about Force India. The environment, the people that I worked with, it was great. And that's now, you know, Aston Martin. But I was always looking at the other team, and especially, that's one of the things I've been thinking about lately is going back, looking over Sebastian Vettel's career, because that's one of the things that got me super excited was seeing those Adrian Newey designed machines. You've got Sebastian Vettel dominating the sport for those 4 championships in a row, and it's like, I want to work for Red Bull. And that was always the thing. And at the end of the 2014 season, I interviewed at Red Bull Racing to be Vettel's performance engineer. And that was pretty cool, and it was pretty daunting. It's like, you know, I've done this for 3 years now. I've done 3 years of trackside. They're looking for a new performance engineer to bring in some new blood because the other people were, the other performance engineers had done it for a while, so they were going on to other things in the company. So I got the job to be Seb's performance engineer and to work with Rocky, which was like, what? This is crazy, right? And then at the end of 2014, it was the Japanese Grand Prix. And Seb announced that he was leaving the team to go to Ferrari. And that afternoon, I got a call from one of the senior people in the team that hired me, and they were like, does this change anything now? I'm like, well, no. I've got a job at Red Bull Racing as a performance engineer at the track. I'm like, okay. So I found out that then I was going to get to work with Daniil Kvyat, and that was a lot of fun. He's actually one of my favorite people. But to answer that story, Force India, and then Red Bull, and then after 3 more years of trackside at Red Bull working with Kvyat and then Verstappen, I went back to the factory to be a simulator performance engineer. So kind of the same kind of job, but not going to all the races and then focusing on more medium-term development rather than optimizing the car at the racetrack every weekend.
Now, not to put Force India down what is now Aston Martin, as we said earlier, but the difference between a Force India and particularly at that time and a Red Bull Racing is quite large in terms of smaller team, very big operation.
Yeah.
if any, and I'm sure there are the differences in working within Force India compared to a Red Bull?
It was super interesting. So the first thing I noticed when I got to Red Bull is the money, the facility, the resources. You know, they were manufacturing almost all of their stuff in-house, whereas Force India had to outsource. You know, they'd laminate their big pieces and their big components like their chassis elsewhere at the time, I'm fairly certain. Their machining resources, they didn't have a big machine shop. They would outsource all of the metallic bits that they need machined, whereas you go through Red Bull's shop and it's this labyrinth of CNC machines and they're producing all of this stuff. So it's like, holy, this is a completely different ballgame. But the one thing I will say is Force India did a lot of stuff very well. Because of the lack of budget, they had to make sure that every single thing that they produced had the highest chance of a hit rate, whereas at the time, there was no budget restrictions in Formula One. Red Bull could just throw money at problems. It's like, right, what are we doing this weekend? We're bringing 2 different front wings to the track to test them. They're prototypes, and if they're good, there's 3 more waiting. You don't have that now with the cost cap era, but at the time, it was crazy. You were taking hand luggage out every weekend from a wing that just got finished, and the engineers are taking it out on a Thursday. You're like, what? I mean, there's all sorts of other crazy stories about these super, super tight deadlines and like last minute bits, whereas Force India, it's like, yeah, we've got 1 floor upgrade this season. Yeah, you just smash that floor up, all right, cut it up and put some new bits on it. That's the only floor you've got, you know? And these are these 2 extremely different things, but for the time, Force India was punching way above their weight. They were huge bang for the buck in terms of efficiency, and in terms of processes, I really feel like they did a lot of things really well. And there's things that we came to Red Bull and I was like, hey, Force India are doing this really well. I think we should, you know, take some of these things on board. And there was some things inside of the things I looked after that I think I learned at Force India and brought those. There was an even bigger amount of stuff that I learned when I got to Red Bull, but still.
So you were able to bring some of that like smaller team creativity and efficiency into it. Were Red Bull forthcoming with you, letting you do that, so to speak?
And that was the cool thing about both those places is you would have as much rope to hang yourself with, if that makes sense. You know, it's like you can get yourself in trouble, but at the same time, you start slowly and build up the trust of people, and yeah, you can have an influence on a very big machine with a little bit of inertia. But at the time, like Red Bull was still quite a flexible team, despite being big. They could react. You know, it's like that floor, that rear wing, or the whatever. It's like, right, they're 3D printing something at the track, and we're going to fix this and that. And you're like, okay. So they were flexible and accommodating and open. I never once had this thing where I was like, I've got this good idea, and somebody's like, don't try that. It's stupid.
That's a great thing to have, I suppose, going to a big team, because a lot of people would think if you're part of the Red Bull operation, you are beholden to the way they do things, rather than being able to bring your own elements and ideas to the table as well.
No, it was great. It was great.
Does it also make you respect, particularly from that era, we're in the budget cap era now in Formula One, but did that experience of working at 2 very different teams in terms of the budgets they were operating on, did that make you respect other smaller teams up and down the grid as well a little bit more, compared to you'd look at a Ferrari and go, well, I know what you're spending. You're probably spending triple of what we're spending at Red Bull, whereas I'm looking further down the grid, you know, the smaller ones. And
in terms of smaller teams, not really. I think, you know, the various incarnations of Force India, Racing Point and Aston, it seems like they're going through that turmoil now where they've now come into having cash and resources and development, and there's new regulations and everything else that's taking them a time to adapt to. But at the same time, you've got Toro Rosso finished quite far down the season despite having all that stuff. So I think it's hard to judge now, but at the time there weren't really that many other smaller teams that I was too excited about. Like, I mean, Williams finished up in 3rd back in 2014, was it? You wouldn't even, like, people coming into the sport now, you see Williams, you know, at the back struggling, and you had Williams like top 3.
Having been involved, particularly, I mean, race day, I can't even imagine how bonkers that is for somebody like yourself in that position. Or is it actually you've done all the prep beforehand, so race days, as long as it goes smoothly, race day is actually quite a calm affair?
Yeah, I think so. And you could have an entire spectrum of weekends. In order of chaos to calm, changeable condition, wet races, pure insanity, and I loved it. That was a lot of fun. On dry weekends, races could be quite surgical. you know, as long as you didn't have any major issues with the car, the driver was happy, you know, you're getting out of it what you put into, or you're getting out of it what you knew you're going to get out of it. It's not like there's any huge surprises. You know, let's say the tires are hugely different conditions from Saturday or Friday to Sunday. Those can be weird if you have brake issues, if you have fueling issues, or other reliability things you're nursing, like thinking back to Ricciardo's, you know, I wasn't at the track then, but watching Ricciardo in Monaco without the MGUK. And you're like, this dude's missing 120 kilowatts of power, and he's still going to win this race. And I can't imagine like thinking about putting myself in that position is like what the performance engineer was managing at the time with the race engineers, like keeping the brakes from catching on fire because you're not doing any work on the rear electrical motor. And it's like, yeah, that's pure chaos. But qualifyings are fun. I guess when you're in a quicker car and you're guaranteed to get into Q3, qualifying's pretty straightforward. But there's like this super quick turnaround. For the performance engineer at Force India, I did the race fuel for the car as well. So I did qualifying and race fuel. But at Red Bull, I didn't do qualifying fuel. But qualifying fueling's one of these. It seems like a really subtle thing, and you saw it in Singapore this year with Max. Remember when he ran out of fuel and he was on this burner of a lap, and they have to abort it last minute, and he's furious. It's like the first thing that happened when I saw that, I was like, I know exactly what happened, and that sucks. It's like you're playing this game of like, especially in changeable conditions. It's like gambling. How many laps are we going to be able to make? You have to predict how fast you're going to go. Then you have to predict how much fuel that's going to consume, and you've got this whole sliding spectrum of things. And then a kilo of fuel is 300ths of a second. And that's the margin between you getting pole position or not getting pole position in Singapore, where overtaking is damn near impossible. So it's wacky.
When you're that guy in the garage, and for the life of me, I wouldn't know if something like that actually happened to you when you were dealing with the fuel at Force India. Yeah. I haven't gone back and studied every race tape of your qualifying sessions when you were at the team, but what's it like? We know what accountability is like for a driver on track. They have to come out and they have to face the media.
Yeah, put your hand up or brush it under the carpet and blame someone else.
Yeah, exactly. You know, oh, well, obviously he drove into me, says Max Verstappen. But
you said the wrong driver there. No. Yeah, they all do that. No, George Russell.
Yeah.
He drove into me.
But as a member of the team in the backroom staff, you don't have to face the media, but you immediately in those moments already have a team group around you. A driver's in a cockpit on their own, they can maybe try and work themselves out. They have time on the moped back to the pit lane or something. You've immediately got your boss and everybody else in that team around you.
They're
let alone
on the radio, like what the happened?
Let alone an angry driver about to come in as well. What are those moments like for somebody behind the scenes who is dealing with that pressure and then who has perhaps made a mistake?
Those are super stressful. I've got a great example that I did. My first race was Barcelona 2012. One of the most cursed Grand Prix ever. Pastor Maldonado wins the race and the Williams garage burns down. That was not a great weekend. But I had two really interesting. So that was my first weekend at the track as a performance engineer on DeResta's car. And I was doing qualifying fuel, and I didn't know how much fuel was in the car because of a miscalculation. And it was a user error. It was my first time doing it. It's an insanely high pressure. You're typing numbers into an Excel spreadsheet every lap, and then telling the fuel man how much fuel to put in the car. And the car's coming down the pit lane. You need to make an estimate of how much you think they're going to be in. That's pretty easy. It's like, they're going to consume like 100 grams down the pit lane. Fine. Tell the fuel man this. But I had something crash on one of my computers or something, and I lost my numbers. So the race engineer at the time, having done that before, he's like, right, we'll put 3 laps of fuel in because we're going to do out lap, in lap, and a timed lap. And we might have aborted or had another extra half a kilo of fuel in the car. It's not that much lap time. But at the same time, you're always pushing to finish like with the finest of margins, because it could be the difference, especially at Force India, between qualifying last or 14th.
Yeah, Q1 or Q2.
Yeah, exactly. And getting in Q2 with those guys is difficult. Is an achievement. Yeah. So that was one of those things. It's like, wow. And you had the race engine, but it was like one of those cool things where all the places I worked, everybody was really together. And if you made a mistake, nobody's trying to throw you under the bus. People are like, because they've been there. They've been that person before. And if you're cocking it up every weekend, you're not going to be there. That's fine, but for the most part, you don't have people in those groups and teams because, one, they have the support, and if they stumble, there's plenty of people in a chain to help you come to the right answer. And that's true of qualifying. That happens during the race. And that was something we had, I think, in Red Bull, we had quite a lot of issues. I think there was like a lot of brakes management discussions, and that took up a lot of capacity during races. And that was a performance engineer job. So I'm constantly on the radio to the race engineer to talk to the driver, and I'm constantly talking to the chief engineer who's looking after the health of the car. So that was like, there's lots of bandwidth processing that, and you're still trying to feed back the race engineer. Also, Max or Danny can go faster here, or you can save fuel more efficiently by doing this. So it's like lots of conversations, lots of stuff going in and out of both ears at all times. It's fun.
You're like a human supercomputer at that point.
No, you're human ADHD processor. You know, it's just like, I mean, during the race, performance engineers probably, there's quite a few people at the team that need to listen to a lot of different conversations, but you've got a headset on, and I probably hear 3 or 4 conversations going on at once. I mean, you can only really lock into one, but you're just listening for that conversation that's relevant to you, that if you need to add any information to that, or just knowing when to keep quiet.
So would you have rather, in your time in Formula One, you'd rather have maybe the mistake of Excel spreadsheet goes down, numbers go down, all right, we'll just put 3 in, rather than having the mistake of being the guy on the pit stop with the wheel gun, and it's, because that, again, is a bit more in the
visible.
spotlight, right?
Nobody knows, like in Silverstone, not Silverstone, in Singapore, nobody really knew what happened.
Yeah.
Like there's a couple things, and
you could hide it behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's like, you say we had a mistake. You know, Max was visibly, audibly upset. But yeah, when you see the mechanic, like one that comes to mind is when Haas in Melbourne, was it 16 or 17? The mechanics were in tears after they double DNF'd that. And that's because you're on, they see it happen, and maybe it wasn't their fault, it was a design fault if it's happening like that consistently. But you see the guys in the paddock, and Roman's giving him a hug, and he's like, go on, lad. It's emotional. Yeah, I'd rather be the dude with the Excel spreadsheet, like, it was somebody else.
Are you able to take off the former F1 employee glasses when you watch the races these days then, or are you still kind of plugged in a little bit when it comes to the technical behind the scenes?
Well, I think with the nature of the content I'm doing, which is mostly technical and analytical, I like to keep that on to some point, but the thing I have now is I don't have any ties to any teams. You know, so nobody's paying me. So it's like, it's not like I was out there before saying anything about a team, but it's like now I can step back from the team. I don't know too much about the internal politics of that team, and I can sit back out from the outside and observe and consume it as a fan, but like a fan with expertise, effectively. And so it's like I can look at stuff and understand what's happening, and it's really, really interesting and challenging to make technical and analytical Formula One accessible for people that are not enthusiasts. You know, so people that don't know what that works, I don't know what that means. How do you explain that? And being able to have the ability to boil that down and explain it to somebody without just boring them to death.
Do you think that makes you the best or worst watch-along guy for a Formula One race? Because you're either there going, actually, I think you're fine. Technically, behind the scenes, we've got this. Or are you the guy that's like nice and explaining it to people like, oh, well, no, that's just...
I think I take the latter approach. It's like, I'm like, that's interesting that they said that, because this could mean this, or this. And if they're on the Sky feed or whatever else, they say something else, I'm like, wrong again, bozo. No, I don't do that. But it's interesting watching that, because I found a lot of people that watch the streams and stuff in the community are actually, they're muting Sky and muting F1 TV and coming to hang out in the live streams, which blows my freaking mind. But it's just something different, because it's the same old. They've had a lot of the same people, and don't get me wrong, like some of the driver commentators' insight is super awesome. I don't know that stuff. I'm not a driver. I can't tell you what that driver's feeling. I can only relate that to stories that I know about, but I'm not a driver. I can just relate that from an engineering point of view. So it's a different point of view. It's not a better or worse one, it's just another one.
So when Paul di Resta's bringing up Max in Singapore and the lack of fueling, and I had a situation many years ago back in Barcelona where we were a bit unsure about the fuel.
Exactly.
You're like, are you really hanging me out to dry at this point, Paul?
All right, Paul. Wind your neck in, mate. No.
Obviously, many people will be able to tell by the accent, you're from North America, American. Dallas, you said.
Dallas, yeah.
Proud home of most sports aside from F1, actually, initially, I imagine, when you were growing up.
Yeah, no, F1 wasn't really on my radar growing up at all.
But the growth of Formula One now in America, you must have experienced it from being involved in the sport.
I guess we've got two things, and I've talked with a couple of other content creator friends about this, and it's really interesting because you've got Drive to Survive, which is getting most of the glory right now, but I think, as you're very familiar with, you've got Instagram Reels, you've got TikTok, and you've got all of these new young fans that probably have only been watching the sport for 1 or 2 years, and they're so enthusiastic about the sport, and there's people coming at it from all sorts of other angles. It's, you know, the people, fashion, politics, in the sport itself, and then there's technical aspects. It's like you've got all these people with these small followings on these platforms with super viral potential reach. And I don't think that's getting enough credit for the growth of Formula One right now. Because like you can't turn on your phone on any of those social media platforms. If you consume something, or if you've said something, Jeffrey Bezos has said, yep, Ollie's talking about Formula One, let's show that on his feed next. You open up your phone, you're scrolling through, and you're seeing some Formula One content from somebody you've never seen, and they've got 1,000 followers, and you're like, oh, you're talking about Formula One too. It's very cool. And I think you're gonna see the way people are consuming sports and sports news change a lot starting now.
You touched on, obviously, the influence of Drive to Survive, new media in general. What about Liberty Media as tailoring Formula One more to a US market? Have they had an impact in that growth, do you think, or is it those other outside factors more?
I think it's definitely Liberty as well, gaining, giving access, allowing Netflix to come in, because I don't know if you would have seen that stuff. I mean, remember back in the day, Bernie Ecclestone was getting mad at Lewis for posting Instagram stories in the paddock. He's like, you can't take pictures in here. It's like, are you kidding me? Like, how are my audience, how are the people that are interested in me supposed to consume this stuff? It's like, this is literally free advertising for your product. You just put more money in your pocket. I think Liberty have done an awesome job with it. A lot of people are critical of the over-Americanization of Formula One, but it's like, it's growing. It's growing. And are there too many races now? Yeah, I think so. I mean, my last season was 19, 20, maybe 21 races. That was hell. I can't imagine people doing 23 this season. It's a lifestyle for sure. But like we would come on European weekends. We would come back. You'd leave the track. I mean, here's how glamorous this is. Race is over Sunday. You do a debrief. It's 4 o'clock, and you're in your underwear in the Barcelona parking lot, changing into your travel clothes, driving to the airport, getting home at 2 a.m., back in the office the next morning at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. It's glamour. Just pure glamour. If you see a bunch of dudes, in their underwear in the parking lot, this is a Formula One race.
That's Red Bull Racing coming back. Yeah.
But there's everybody, man. That was the usual sight after a race in the staff car park, is everybody changing your suitcases out of the back of the van, changing into your travel jeans and travel shirt.
Some teams rotate now as well with personnel.
Yeah,
so
I
you
think
have
so.
More time on and off, so people don't have that full stress load.
I think the number of the rotation personnel is very low compared to the, your core traveling group. It's not that many rotating out. Maybe some teams are doing mechanics, but I don't even think teams have 2 shifts of mechanics. I think this is going to become a thing. It has to be, for sure, in the future. Otherwise, people are going to stop wanting to do it. I mean, I was at 20 races a year, and after doing that for 6 years, I was just kind of over it. I was like, I've got stuff I want to do in my life. I've got hobbies. I don't want F1 to be my life. And now being a content creator is spending every weekend doing Formula One again. Damn it. But it's on my terms now, so.
How do you deal with the jet lag? Because you have to be on point. You mentioned already with being able to understand, take in information, process and use that information elsewhere, on point with your calculations, the numbers that you're using on track. How do you deal with that jet lag then?
You just get used to doing it. Like going from west to east is quite difficult. Like going to Melbourne, for example. My favorite way to deal with that is when we'd fly to Melbourne. It'd be like 24 hours door to door, which sucked. So London, Hong Kong, Melbourne, I'd usually bring my bicycle and go out a few days early. So get to the hotel 9 o'clock Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday morning, unpack the bike and then go cycle for 6 hours. Perfect way to beat jet lag. You'd stay up, go have food, and then wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and not go back to sleep. And see, on the more prone you are to being severely impacted by jet lag, the earlier you tend to go out.
Do the teams do anything specific? Is there, they hand out, I don't know, even melatonin or something?
No, they usually give you advice in terms of like, they'll be like, right, here's what we're doing. Here's on the flight when you should be awake. Should you sleep or stay awake on this flight? When should you try to go to sleep this night? And then a lot of times you just deal with it. And by the time, Thursday, Friday rolls around at the track, you're thereabouts.
Front of the plane, or are you still sat upright trying to sleep at the back? You don't get the lie flat beds?
No, it depends. It just depends. At Force India, I was in the back, and then when I moved to Red Bull, they had some cash. It's like, right, you can fly business now. And when you get on one of those nice Emirates or like Singapore Airlines with the lie flat beds, you're in heaven. You're just like, right, see you guys later after 3 gin and tonics.
But of course, it's all out of the system by the time you need to start working again.
Yeah.
That's the cycling, it gets it out.
Exactly. Cycling, I miss that. I miss that the most.
So what's the kind of working week like for you building up to any race in general? You say, Melbourne, you get there early.
Yeah.
For European races, I'm presuming you don't.
No, I think even now with COVID, teams have also changed and tried to push their personnel out to the track as late as possible. But I think 2017, it was something like European race, fly Wednesday, land Wednesday early evening, go out for a meal. Thursday was setup day. So you'd be setting up your laptop, going through all the systems, going through the run plan, setup sheets, checking the cars, patching them, making sure all the bodywork was in compliance. And that whole system's changed now. Friday practice. And so that was it. You could go out Wednesday or Thursday night if you wanted to have a meal. Friday night you're at the track until late. But the curfew's also becoming longer, so you're not at the track until 3 o'clock in the morning anymore, which is great. And then Saturday, qualifying, Sunday race. And then usually for engineers, fly back Sunday night, back in the office on Monday. And when you had double headers in Europe, that was tough. So it was fun.
With a double header in Europe, do you still go back to the office, or do you work on site when you?
No, most of the time you'll go back to the office because it's just more, you'll be more productive that way. Otherwise you end up like working from a hotel. And you have to pay the hotel for ex-engineering staff. But double headers on flyways are actually pretty awesome because a lot of the time it's like, we had a couple really cool trips between double headers, flyways. One of them was like when you'd have Singapore, Japan, or Japan, Malaysia, or something like that. When Japan was the second race, you'd fly from that race to Japan and we'd go to Tokyo for a couple of days. And that was always awesome. We went cycling around Mount Fuji one year. That was so cool, around all the lakes. And I was always deathly ill with the cold. Like there's like this seasonal thing where like come the end of the season, everybody's run down and tired and everybody's getting cold. So we're cycling up Mount Fuji and I end up like sleeping in one of the bus parking lots while everybody else finished the other 2 hours up to the top. And they came back down. I was like, right, we'll cruise back down.
Interesting what you have is like a fond memory.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you've been to, let's get into some of like the juicy details, right? Working in F1. You've been to a number of tracks all over the globe. Which of the circuits that isn't currently on the calendar do you think is the best one and perhaps should be brought back to the calendar?
I don't have any strong feelings on things that aren't on the calendar now that should be back. Like let's say for example, if we lose Spa, that's going to be a disaster. Amazing track, cool atmosphere, and I love being in. It's just like you're in the middle of nowhere in this track, but it's beautiful and it's a great circuit. It's a real old school circuit it needs some guts to get around that track and go quickly. And it's one of those that always has also super interesting setup challenges as well. It's not like a one-dimensional track. You need to do a lot of things well at the track, from engineering, the driver, and then everything else. Crazy tracks that aren't on the calendar anymore that I miss. Korea was fun. Mokpo was a super cool place, and that was more me reflecting on that not as a circuit, but as like an experience and a place to go, because it was one of those places you go that's super, super different. There's not Hockenheim was always fun. I like going to Germany.
Old Hockenheim or the smaller Hockenheim? You talking about driving out into the woods?
No. I mean, old Hockenheim was, I mean, if you take that back, if you look at old Spa-Francorchamps, it's like that was this huge thing, and like you're going through the villages and all sorts of stuff. And now it's a lot different. Obviously, everything we've seen on TV for the past ever is, you know, new small Spa. But Hockenheim's another one that was pretty fun every time we went to.
There's a lot of talk about Germany, and yeah, the Mercedes have been great, but obviously last 2 years not necessarily been competitive, and the lack of racing in Germany as well now without German Grand Prix for a number of years.
It's a bit of a bummer because Hockenheim's a cool circuit. I've got lots of fond memories of that track, not only from Formula 1, but going out there for the Formula Student competition as well, and the F1 race would be on like the next weekend or whatever, and that was super cool.
What about drivers? You said you've mentioned a few already. Which was the most enjoyable driver to work for in your career?
I worked with De Resta, Perez, Kvyat, Verstappen, and all of them were completely different. And I think when I was working with Paul, I was still learning so much. You know, I was learning from him more than I was assisting him, I think, sometimes. I was doing a good job, and I was making sure the car was running well. And then Perez, Checo's super laid back and fun to work with, and he's a super funny guy. I had a lot of fun working with Danny, but like Max was really easy to work with because the car was quick, and he was exceptionally quick, and the dialogue loops were really short. It's like, what do you need to go faster? And if I would come up with suggestions and ideas, they'd be well received, or at least he wouldn't tell me that he hated them. But I think we did a good job. I did a good job, and worked well with that driver and the race engineering team. But that was different when he's like literally immediately fast out of the box. You know, the first year qualifying took him a while to build up to. Then his first couple of years, he was quite aggressive and over the top quite early, which fine. But look, it's been a very interesting trajectory for him. And now they've got arguably one of the fastest cars, and he's destroying everybody.
When you started working with him, with Verstappen that is, did you feel there is a difference in him? You know, many people look at a young driver and say he's got it. Did you feel that there was maybe something special in a Max Verstappen compared with other people? And that's not to discredit the other drivers.
No, definitely not. I think, yeah, definitely Max was super quick immediately. Like his first qualifying in Barcelona, I remember he was disappointed. He's like, I didn't beat my teammate. It's like, it's your first weekend driving this car, mate. Like, slow down. But you'd seen that there was something there, and it was pretty clear pretty quickly that this dude was going to have a shot at it. He was definitely going to have a shot.
This is going to sound ridiculous because I'm sure I know the answer to this one. But if you were to bring one of your former drivers here to the Brewhouse and Kitchen in Milton Keynes, which one of those drivers would you like to sit and have a beer with?
Honestly, any of them.
Okay.
Any of them.
I was sure you were going to say Ricardo just to see him do it out of a shoe or something like that.
No, I think drinking out of a shoe is absolutely repulsive behavior, and it's disgusting. Especially out of one of those race boots after a race weekend. You know, like the suits they change every day. I don't think they change boots every day. And there's going to be some funk in one of those boots after a Singapore Grand Prix, you know.
Pungent, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, thank you, mate.
Yeah, special hops grains and
exactly.
Daniil Ricciardo boot sweat in there as well, right?
Oh, triple filtered.
Obviously, inside an F1 team as well, there's loads of personnel. We see some F1 teams have outside personnel that seem very impactful on the running of the team. As an example, a helmet Marco type, for instance, obviously heavily involved in what happens in Red Bull racing. How involved is that sort of person, like a helmet Marco, in running things, making decisions for on track as well as off track? Or is it kind of like a figurehead that is there and we hear about, but actually they're not the one making the decisions like that?
I think it depends quite a bit on the person in the team. I think you didn't really, like Helmut was very much involved in the young drivers, the driver contracts, assigning, and any big deals to do with the team. Like he answered to Dietrich, you know, all the way up the ladder to the top. And then between him and Christian, probably that's where all the big decisions around the team are made, other than getting approval from Dietrich. But yeah, I don't see Helmut as a figurehead to the team. I see him as very much involved in making big decisions and signing checks to big deals. So.
And he's not a kind of guy that just as an example again, you're not doing your work and you've got helmet Marco leaning over your shoulder and you're checking, you know.
No, if
get out of it, helmet. Like, this isn't your role here.
No,
right
no.
now.
If he doesn't know who you are, it's probably a good thing because you probably haven't screwed anything up. If he knows who you are, you've probably screwed up. No, it's not true. But yeah, he not somebody to get involved in the day-to-day, anything to do with what are you doing? Why? You know, it was very much top level, and even Christian to the same degree let people get on with what they were doing. And, you know, it would go through the chain of people, and it wasn't a very deep structure of people. You know, it was me, my boss, and my boss reported to Christian, or, you know, one more layer between that. But it's like the same thing. It's like he comes to the office, and the good thing about being at the track is he'd come to the office and Christian would find, it's like, right, who's in the office that I know from the track? And he'd say hi every now and then, because it's like, you know, there's hundreds of people in this design office. You don't know all of them. He's like, how's everything going in the simulator? I'm like, it's good. He's like, cool.
I've done my interaction here at the office. Now I'm going to go and do my work. Excellent.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, but no, it was not this like doomsday thing. No, nothing like that.
Helmet's obviously involved with a lot of the young drivers, as you mentioned. Red Bull have the AlphaTauri sister team, if you will, former Toro Rosso, now AlphaTauri. Do you have much interaction in Red Bull with AlphaTauri? How close is that relationship around Grand Prix weekends and your interaction with them? Or is
it's very separate, yeah. I think, and there's a lot of regulations, because personally I had nothing to do with them, let's say, for example, but I think there's also been a lot of regulation changes over the last few years and clarifications on how little you can actually share between those teams. But I mean, at one point, look back into the early days of Red Bull Toro Rosso when they joined the sport before winning any championships. They were basically the same chassis with different engines. You know, that's how close it was then. But to now, it's like, now they've got complete different development cycles, teams, and aerodynamics. And you have, you know, last season, both of them with the same engine, Red Bull finishing first and Toro Rosso having a really tough season. So,
I mean, they're like many of us. They just had weight problems.
Yeah, exactly.
They just had to trim down a bit.
Just a couple extra kilos.
We touched on you not as in focus perhaps as, you know, a wheel gun guy who makes a mistake. You're not a driver. You're not a team principal in that sense. But working behind the scenes and things like Drive to Survive have done a little bit to add a bit more of a human element and depth, I guess, to what we see in a Formula One team. Do you think more should be done in Formula One to bring a bit of focus and attention onto the roles like yourself that you were in?
Yeah, I think so. And I'd really like to help do some of that too, because it's like, it's really...
Why? Why do you think it should?
Because I think there's two aspects. One of those aspects is it takes this team from this, like, you know, it takes it from team, let's say, for example, team Max or team Toto or team Christian, you know, which is, you know, this is their team. It's like, that's not what this is. This is a collection of humans and people with their own stories and backgrounds, and those are the kind of things that people are super interested in the sport. It's like, right, you know, you get people that are enthusiasts. It's like, I've seen enough of the team bosses, I've seen enough of the drivers. Who's this person? How does this system work? And the team bosses and drivers don't tell those stories because it's not their story. It's the people around it, the young men and women in the sport now. And I think that's super cool, and that makes it more accessible, more approachable, and more human.
Do you think that helps what we're hearing Formula One is trying to do so much in terms of, you know, increasing diversity in the teams?
Absolutely. Yeah, like when I started in Force India back in 2011, there weren't that many women in the teams. And then now, when I finished at Red Bull, you look through the design office and look at the race team, and there's a lot of women in the team, and it's like, okay, this is a lot different. And I think it's cool. And it's really cool to see, like, people like, you know, Hannah at Red Bull being an amazing role model and example for all these young women or girls at the time that are the future, and they see Hannah on the pit wall, they're like, I want to do that. And I think in the next 10 more years, you're going to see even more diverse teams, and I think it's awesome.
And speeding up I guess, following perhaps people further back then brings more attention. Oh, there are so many other roles. So much.
Exactly. And that's cool, because you turn on the TV, you see driver, team principal, mechanic, pit wall person. That's tip of the iceberg. You know, the teams have 400 to 800 people, and you've highlighted 20 of them, tops.
I suppose things like the F1s in schools event as well.
Yeah, that's another thing. You know, on from F1 in schools, then you've got Formula SAE, which is, you know, the next part of your academic career. That accompanying piece of like extracurricular work to get people excited, and exposed to these topics. I think those are all part of the same machine.
And now you're a content creator. You've stepped away from the track, I guess, content creation. You can kind of lead that focus a little bit down that route that you want to go to yourself.
Yeah, and I've spent a little bit of time doing, educational stuff, because I think I must have answered probably 300, 400 emails and DMs this year about how do I get a job in F1. It's like, well, I've made a video on it. It's like, here's how I think a good framework is, because a lot of people, like, first of all, they want to get a job in Formula 1, but their first question is, what job should I do? I'm like, I don't know. You need to figure that out. I can't tell you what that job is, but here's some frameworks for you to understand what jobs are. There's lots of resources out there that you can use. And that's one of the things that I'm really passionate about, is talking to young people that have questions and have the drive. Because there's a lot of people like, I want to be the guy on the pit wall. Why? Because he's on TV. All right, shut up. I don't want to talk to you. I don't have any interest. It's like, but like people that are super passionate about something, they're willing to make probably a lot of sacrifices and compromises in order to get there. That's super cool.
It's a lot cheaper, though, to get a job with Red Bull and then get given the free, really comfy overcoat that you get on the pit wall than it is to buy one of them. They're quite expensive on the website.
Exactly. It's like, here's what you want. You're like, yeah, but you get to travel the world and you get all the team kits. Like, right. Well, you give away 24 weekends of your life and you get some t-shirts and some nice coats that you can keep. And they're good stuff. They're high quality stuff.
I've done less for a free t-shirt.
Exactly. It's like, right, take your life and live it for the Formula One. But it's awesome.
Do you get anybody from your kind of former Formula One life viewing your content and kind of giving you maybe like, hey, you're giving a bit too much away here?
No. I know where my NDA, my restrictions on what I can and can't talk about. And to be honest with you, most people in Formula One, they don't want to know the juicy stuff. They think they do. Then they're bored. They're like, wait, that's so boring. I don't care about that. Tell me about. They want to know, what does Christian smell like and stuff. But I'm like, I don't know. I don't stand right next to him, man.
That's how you lose your job at Red Bull Racing.
You guys are weird. No, but like, most of the Formula One fans, they just want to know about the general stuff from somebody that knows what they're talking about. And I think that's one of the things that's been really interesting, is like learning what things not to take for granted that are actually quite interesting to the general public and enthusiasts alike. So like people that are new to the sport, people that are, I've been watching since '85, and they're both finding certain types of information really, really interesting, because people aren't talking about a lot of the engineering stuff. Some of the teams are starting to do it now, which is cool to see. But nobody's ever told me it's like, hey, you're giving too much away. I'll usually more often than not get the nod from somebody. It's like, how did you know about that? And I was like, intuition and a pretty good guess. And after doing it for 10 years, you see what's happening. You're like, it's possibly this, this, or this.
This is going to be a really bad question to ask now, because you've just said, I made a video on it, so go and check that out. But what advice do you have for people that are trying to get into Formula One? And aside from, link in bio, obviously.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think the most important thing is to figure out what you want to do and then figure out the path to get there. So that means identifying what that job is, and then what the education or whatever else of that person looks like to get there. So if it's a mechanic, do you need a mechanical engineering degree? No. But do you look at where all the other mechanics in the team, look at where they've come from, and look at their path. What do they do? Apprenticeships? Do they work in lower formula? And look at that. Engineers, what's their education? Like, oh, okay, I want to be a simulator performance engineer. Cool. So you'll probably work in vehicle dynamics. You'll probably have a mechanical engineering degree. And you'll probably need to have the eligibility to work in the UK, Switzerland, or Italy. And that's actually one of the most crucial things for non-EU people, is the fact that you need to have right to work in those countries, which is a big barrier to entry. And that's the main reason why I moved to the UK to study here, is not only for the degree, but because it gave me a visa to work in the country. Because let's imagine there's a junior vehicle dynamics position advertised. How many people do you think apply for that? Hundreds. If you get your CV and you don't have the right to work in the UK, your CV goes in the bin.
Straight out.
Yeah, exactly, because it's like, we can't afford to. So those are some of the practicalities of people that want to get a job. Can you do it? Yeah, absolutely. I know loads of, for example, Americans and Canadians that work in Formula One. I know loads of them. But you've got to identify the pathways in, and the information's out there.
This is probably a bit round away from what you'd expect, I guess, but most people who want to work in F1 have a love of F1.
Yeah.
Do you find there are a lot of people, or any people at all, in these F1 teams that don't care about F1, but they care about the aerodynamics and that sort of process rather than the sport isn't what gets them into it. It's their brain and ability around what the sport is based on.
I think most of the people start off very passionate about the sport, and then that drives their enthusiasm for their subject matter, that their expertise in. Because at the end of the day, it's like, if you wanted to do an engineering job, you could probably take an engineering job at some other engineering firm doing something else, like petroleum, for example, and make twice the money as a junior. Maybe not twice, but a lot more, you know. So it's like, if you're not doing it for money, what are you doing it for? It's a passion. You know, if you want to be a race engineer, you're giving away 24 weekends a year. It's not just because you love engineering. Well, maybe it's because you love race engineering and hanging out with sweaty drivers. I don't know.
Love a beer out of a shoe. Sitting
next to your favorite team principal on the pit wall as he gives you that terrible death stare as you screw up qualifying. I don't know.
Those are the memories, right?
Exactly.
What's harder, content creation or working in the pit lane?
I'll tell you what I think right now. I think content creation is so much harder. I've this last year doing full-time content around F1 and gaming, I've worked more hours than my toughest season traveling trackside. Because A, I don't know the landscape and I'm learning something new and it's something exciting and different. But it's been a tough year. It's been a fun year. I've learned a lot, and it's like anything. Like my first trackside year in Formula 1, I didn't know what I was doing as a performance engineer, and the learning curve was like this. It was a vertical. Every day, every hour was something new, and I'm constantly over capacity and trying to absorb new information so that I do my job better. It's the same with this again, which is exciting. This is what this is exciting about: is doing something different and taking. The good thing is I combine both those things. I take all that stuff that I've learned in those times, and then I can find ways to effectively package that up and get other people either interested in the sport or educated about the sport. I think those are the two things that this allows me to do that I couldn't do before. Because before, when you're in the sport, you can't talk about it. Like I couldn't have a YouTube channel talking about what's happening. They'd be like, yeah, it's a bit of a conflict of interest. So it's like, right, well, I'm gonna leave now and do this. And so that's been a lot of fun. It's just been super challenging, is learning anything new.
Isn't that like the next step for Formula One to some extent? Having that interaction almost directly with fans during things like race weekend, where somebody would say, look down a camera at the back of the Red Bull garage and say, I can't believe this happened. We had this, this, and this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you're starting to see the reason teams probably weren't doing it sooner is because they weren't allowed to. Now, with liberty and the way teams are allowed to present stuff and how they're allowed to film some things in the paddock, I think you'll start seeing more of it. So a little bit more access.
Blake, you've been awesome to chat with in terms of like getting into everything in your past, present, and future.
Thanks so much.
This is probably the appropriate time that you look down the camera, you tell everybody where to find your content, where to find you on social media.
The best place you can find me at Break on Twitter. It's BRRRAKE, and then on YouTube and TikTok, all my Formula 1 content's on Break F1. So BRRRAKE F1. And then I do lots of race watch-alongs, educational, analytical. We'll do breakdown analysis over on Twitch, and that's at Break as well.
The Excel spreadsheet's never gone down at home?
No. So my Python workbooks and my Excel spreadsheets are now completely bomb-proof after 10 years of experience. I have not had a single stream crash during a race weekend, and let's see what happens this season. Maybe we'll break Twitch at some point, but probably not.
That's the way to do it. You spend 10 years in Formula 1, and that sets you up perfectly for a career in content creation.
Yeah, so you can be broke as hell.
Cheers, man. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Ollie.